Wealthy guests didn't see this coming. Waitress's piano performance stunned everyone. There is a restaurant in the heart of a big city where ordinary people rarely go. The kind of place where the chairs cost more than most people's monthly rent. Where the waitstaff are trained to stay quiet, stay invisible, and never draw attention to themselves. The food is expensive, the guests are powerful, and the rules are simple. The customers are the center of the world, and the staff are just part of the furniture. Maya worked there for 2 years. She was 28 years old, and every single evening she walked into that restaurant, tied her apron around her waist, tucked a small notepad into her pocket, and became invisible. That was the job. Smile when smiled at. Refill the glass before the guest even notices it's getting low. Be present without being seen. She was very good at it. Most of the guests never looked at her face. Not really. They looked at the tray she was carrying, or the menu she placed in front of them, or the wine she poured. But not at her. After a while, you stop expecting it. You just do the job and go home. But there was one thing Maya did every single night without fail, and nobody at that restaurant ever noticed it. In the far corner of the main dining room, there was a baby grand piano. Black, polished, beautiful. It sat there on a small raised platform, used only during private events and ticketed evenings. On regular nights, it just sat there quietly, doing nothing. And every night, when Maya walked past it on her way to the kitchen, she would slow down for just a second. She would let her fingers hover an inch above the keys, never touching them, never making a sound, and then she would keep walking. She did this for 2 years. Nobody ever noticed. What nobody at that restaurant knew was that Maya had spent 12 years of her life learning to play that kind of piano. She had studied at a conservatory. She had performed in recitals. She had, at one point, believed that music was going to be her whole life. And then one morning, 3 years ago, her mother had a stroke. Her mother was the one who had first put Maya's small hands on a piano keyboard when she was just 4 years old. She was the one who had driven her to lessons every Saturday, who had sat in the back of every recital and cried quietly because she was so proud. When the stroke happened, Maya's mother couldn't move her left side. She couldn't speak clearly. She needed full-time care, and there was nobody else to give it. So Maya put the music away. She packed the dream into a box, pushed it to the back of her mind, and went looking for a job that paid well enough to cover the hospital bills and the home care costs. That job turned out to be waitressing at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. The tips were good. The hours were long. She didn't complain. She just walked past the piano every night and kept her hands to herself. For 2 years, that was her life. And then one evening in December, everything changed. The restaurant had been booked out for a corporate gala. 200 guests, executives, investors, people whose names were on buildings. The room was decorated beautifully. The kitchen had been preparing for 3 days, and the event had a hired pianist who was supposed to arrive at 6:30 to set up and play background music through the dinner. At 6:45, the chef got a phone call. The pianist had been rushed to the hospital. A burst appendix. He wasn't coming. The gala started in 15 minutes. The chef, a big man who almost never panicked, stood in the middle of the kitchen, looking like someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. He called 2 people he knew. One didn't pick up. One said they were already booked for another event across the city. He hung up and stood there for a moment, thinking hard. And then he remembered something. About 2 years ago, on a quiet Tuesday evening, he had walked past the break room and heard someone humming. A long, complicated melody. Not a pop song. Not something you'd hear on the radio. The kind of thing you only know if you've spent years around classical music. He had poked his head in and found Maya sitting alone at the small table, eating her dinner, completely unaware she was making any sound at all. He had asked her, half joking, if she played. She had looked embarrassed and changed the subject. He hadn't thought about it again until this very moment. He found her near the water station at the far end of the dining room, refilling glasses before the guests arrived. "Maya," he said, "do you still play?" She looked up at him. For a moment she didn't say anything. She just looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "How long?" she asked. 8 minutes. Maybe 10. Just something soft while the first course is served. Anything. She looked across the room at the piano. She looked back at him. And then she said something that he would think about for a long time afterward. "Give me 2 minutes to wash my hands." She walked to the employee restroom at the back of the restaurant and stood at the sink with the cold water running over her fingers. She stared at herself in the mirror. She looked tired. She always looked a little tired these days. Her apron was slightly stained from the prep work she'd done earlier. Her hair was pulled back tight. She thought about the last time she had played in front of people. It was the night after her mother's stroke. Her mother was in the hospital, sedated, a machine helping her breathe. Maya had found a small electronic keyboard in the hospital's therapy room, the kind they use for elderly patients, and she had asked a nurse if she could borrow it. She had carried it into her mother's room and sat beside the bed in the dark and played for 2 hours. Her mother couldn't open her eyes. She couldn't speak. But at some point, Maya noticed a tear running down the side of her face. That was the only time Maya had cried during the whole thing. Right then, in that dark room, playing music for someone who might not even know she was there. She turned off the tap. She dried her hands. She looked at herself one more time in the mirror. She decided not to take her apron off. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it as herself, as the person she actually was right now, not as some version of the girl who used to perform in recitals. She walked back out into the dining room, crossed the floor without looking at anyone, sat down at the piano bench and adjusted it. The room was filling up. Guests were beginning to take their seats. The noise of 200 people finding their places and greeting each other filled the air. Nobody was paying attention to the woman in the apron sitting at the piano in the corner. She placed her hands on the keys, and she began to play. She chose the piece her mother had taught her first. A Chopin nocturne, the kind of music that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't demand your attention with a big dramatic opening. It just begins, quietly and gently, and then slowly, without you realizing it, it has your whole heart. The first table to go quiet was the one closest to the piano. A man in a dark suit stopped mid-sentence and turned his head slightly, like he'd heard something unexpected. His colleague kept talking for a moment, before noticing that no one was listening anymore. Then that table went quiet too. It moved across the room like a wave. Table by table, conversation by conversation, the noise dropped. Not because anyone announced it, not because the music was loud, but because there was something in the way she was playing that made talking feel wrong, like laughing in a library, like checking your phone during a sunset. At the head table, there was a man, one of the senior partners at the firm hosting the gala. He had been at this restaurant more times than he could count. He was the kind of person who didn't really notice the staff, not out of cruelty, just habit. He'd been talking about a business deal he was trying to close, growing increasingly annoyed at some complication that had come up that week. He was in the middle of a sentence when the person across from him stopped responding and looked toward the far corner of the room. He turned around. He saw a woman in a waitress uniform sitting at the piano, eyes half closed, playing something so precise and so full of feeling that for a moment, he genuinely forgot what he had been saying. He sat there with his mouth slightly open. He closed it. He didn't say anything else for the next several minutes. He just listened. Maya finished the nocturne and moved, without stopping, into something else. This one was different. It wasn't a famous piece. Nobody in the room would have recognized it. It was a melody she had written herself over the years, built slowly, note by note, on her mother's kitchen table during the long evenings after the stroke, when her mother was asleep and the house was quiet, and Maya had nothing but a small keyboard, and too many feelings, and nowhere to put them. It was the same melody she had been humming without realizing it at work. The same one the young busboy had once asked her about. The same one she had told him she didn't know the name of. She knew exactly what it was. She had just never said it out loud. When the last note faded, the room was completely silent for 3 full seconds. Then it erupted. Not polite applause. Not the kind of clapping you do at a corporate event because you're supposed to. Real applause. Surprised applause. The kind that comes from people who were not expecting to feel something and felt it anyway. Several people at the tables near the front were on their feet without quite realizing when they had stood up. Maya sat still for a moment, then she stood up, straightened her apron, and walked back to the floor. She picked up a water pitcher from the service station and began refilling glasses at the nearest table. She was working again, before the applause had even fully died down. At the head table, the senior partner caught her eye as she passed. He looked like a man who had just been reminded of something he'd forgotten. "That was extraordinary," he said simply. Maya smiled and thanked him, and moved on to the next table. Later that night, After the gala ended and the last guests had filtered out, the restaurant manager found Maya in the kitchen stacking clean glasses. He told her that one of the guests, a woman who ran an arts foundation, had left her business card at the host stand with a note on the back. The note said, "When you're ready to play again, call me." Not as background music, as the reason people come. Maya held the card for a long moment. Then she put it in the pocket of her apron. The chef found her a few minutes later as she was putting on her coat to leave. He started to say something and stopped. He looked like he was trying to find the right words and not quite getting there. Finally he said, "I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner." Maya shook her head. "It wouldn't have mattered," she told him. "I wasn't ready sooner." She meant it. On the drive home that night, she called her mother. Her mother's speech had been coming back slowly over the past year. Short sentences, careful words, but real. Maya told her what had happened. She told her about the piano, and the gala, and the 200 people who went quiet. Her mother didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, very slowly, "I knew you would, Mija. I always knew." Maya didn't quit her job the next morning. She didn't suddenly become famous overnight. That's not how real life works. And this is a real story. She went back to the restaurant the following Friday. She tied on her apron. She refilled the water glasses and smiled at the guests and did her job well, because that's who she was. But she also called the woman from the Arts Foundation. She left a message. She started keeping the small keyboard beside her bed again, instead of in the closet where it had been sitting for 2 years. And every night, when she walked past the big black piano in the corner of the dining room, she didn't just hover her fingers above the keys. She let herself remember what it felt like when they touched. That night, one of the busboys, a young kid who had been working at the restaurant for only a few weeks, stopped her in the hallway near the kitchen. He had heard the whole thing from behind the service door. "That melody you played at the end," he said. "The second one. What was it called?" Maya smiled. For the first time, she had an answer. "It doesn't have a title yet," she said, "but it will."